this is the oil players of the world, with everyone except Saudi Aramco involved now, saying that they don't think the price is ever going to significantly drop again, because they've already put $170 billion worth of infrastructure investment throughout this whole project. There are 8 major strip mining operations just in the Athabasca region alone, and there are 4 major tar sands regions throughout the province, including the Wabatka, Peace River, as well as the Cold Lake region. But the energy input-output ratio is really just a tipping point, because as this continues on, just like any other major area, you're going to get the good stuff first, which is actually the mining regions where they can get the best return. The 70% roughly, or a bit more actually, of the tar sands reserves are made of the in-situ process, where they still have to devastate forests in all areas. They do it primarily through where you would have normally 1 pump jack for a well area for sweet crude. They can have between 6 and a dozen of these similar jacks to pump in both high steam or high temperature steam, as well as massive amounts of energy to produce that. So it actually wastes even more water. It actually increases climate change and energy consumption a little bit faster. But when we're looking at all the major water waste we have right now, you've probably heard that the Three Gorges Dam is one of the largest dams in the world. It's the largest dam in the world if you look at the material and the size of the actual stuff going on. But the largest earthen dam on the planet by volume is actually around the largest of Syncrude's tailing ponds, which is a misnomer. It's not a pond, it's a giant lake. They're multiple kilometers across. You might have heard about what happened with the ducks some months ago, like 3 months ago. That major international headline was important, but there was a slight hypocritical note to it. Communities downstream for which that water has been leaching into, the poison toxic water from the 10 major ponds, has actually had major health concerns for over 20 years, which has only increased. The speed to which people in the community are dying from unattributed illnesses has only increased. Elders there will tell you, when they were like my age or younger, they would have an average of 1 to maybe even 3 deaths in a year, and each one would, cause the entire community of Fort Chipewyan to basically freeze for a while and deal with it. Last year, 22 people died. This year, there have already been over a dozen. These are things that are all from autoimmune diseases, sometimes heart problems, things that you need very specific science to actually say definitely came from tar sand leaching, but they've had no cooperation whatsoever. For the last 11 years, they've been demanding a baseline health study from the Albertan government to be done. So last year, Fort Chipewyan finished basically getting their own study done, proving that yes, the animals that the community being isolated for 75% of the year still live off of, which is moose and fish and so on, are definitely contributing. They're completely off the graph for their levels of arsenic and similar things in their bloodstream. One way or the other, it's not conclusive if that also includes the water, which is still drawn right off of Athabasca Lake, which of course is filled a good chunk of the way by the Athabasca River. This also leads to 40% of the flow of the Mackenzie River all the way through the 2 northern Great Lakes right out to the Arctic Ocean. World-renowned sort of equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize winner for water, Dr. David Schindler from the University of Alberta, usually uses the phrase, if one of the tailing ponds, just one of them, ever breach and completely lets go of all their effluents down the river system, the world will forever forget the Exxon Valdez spill, because it'll be completely irrelevant. It will take out life through all of these lakes all the way down. And that's just one. There's 10 of them, and only a couple of years ago there was a minor but significant earthquake through the region. They say that these ponds, some of them would have 300-foot dikes, are starting to leach at pretty alarming rates. Long story short, the refineries are also popping up all over places outside of here. Chevron is not just trying to expand this one. They're trying to do the same kind of thing in the San Francisco area. The place Richmond just across the bay. They want to build up a massive one there. They're doing similar types of things. And what's really important to note about the way the refining process works, don't write these numbers down. They're very approximate. But roughly speaking, if you take a barrel of regular sweet crude, if you want to call it that, from somewhere where there's a really good field, roughly half of that will be able to be produced into a gasoline later on. But since it's actually much worse for tar sand, you produce a tar sand crude barrel, you'll get a roughly 10 to 12% will be able to turn into gasoline later on. So when Chevron talks about doubling this refinery and switching over to tar sand stuff, well, they're not going to double, they're actually going to go up 7 or 8 times as far as air pollution, and they'll more than quadruple the amount of water pollution, but they're actually going to reduce the amount of gasoline that they're able to produce and put on the world's market. So I'm going to stop there and move on to Kaylee will speak on.
Sure.
more to do with the SPP, Tilma, etc.?
Perfect. As I'm starting a coughing fit, I hope I can make it through this. This past spring, I headed up to Fort McMurray with Blair and a bunch of folks from BC who wanted to go and see the tar sands, excuse me, firsthand. And when we were up there, we had the privilege of meeting with several First Nations elders, and part of what we heard from them in that they were sharing their stories of the impacts that the tar sands development has. We heard that they're about the impacts that it's having on their communities, their cultures, as well as their health. And part of that conversation centered on the dramatic increase, like McDonald said, of cancer in Fort Chipewyan over the past couple of years. We heard from elders that as we were visiting, it was March 2008, and that since January there had already been 6 deaths up in Fort Chipewyan. And in my opinion, this is just another part of Canada's colonial legacy. And if we look back at the kind of legacy of colonialism, we see that there's often this rapid development of lands and resources, and how this is done really systemically. And so governments and corporate elites take a very specific form of ruling that has kind of intimate consequences in people's everyday lives. So today I'm going to talk to you about 2 agreements that facilitate the development of the tar sands. The SPP, Security and Prosperity Partnership Agreement, and the Trade, Investment and Labor Mobility Agreement, TILMA, are both 2 policies that I'm going to argue we need to fight in order to stop the tar sands. Now, how are the SPP and TILMA similar? Both of these agreements were negotiated secretly behind closed doors. There's no legislative debate around whether or not these agreements should exist. They both promote unfettered markets and put corporate investor interests first. They also have their kind of prime purpose is to harmonize and deregulate. So what is the SPP? I'm going to do this, try and do it really briefly. It was started, excuse me, in 2005 at a summit with the elected heads of states of US, Canada, and Mexico. And at their 2006 SPP summit in Cancun, they created the North American Competitiveness Council, NAC. And this is the only advisory body to the heads of state. And Canada appoints members to that committee through the Council of Chief Executives, with Canadian Council of Chief Executive, which makes out 150 members of Canada's largest corporations, many of whom are US owned. So what we see are these business elites are appointed to NAC, and one of them includes the president of the tar sands operations, Suncor. And again, these elites have access to these government leaders who put in place SPP policies. So the SPP is not in a treaty, it's not an official law, but they describe it as a form of dialogue. But when they do meet, they meet regularly, and they do things like put out research surveys and develop policy. So SPP's core agenda is one of economic free trade and national security, and they say, of course, that this will bring about prosperity for people. But what we've seen with NAFTA, of course, is that it's actually led to increasing poverty and massive displacement of people. Now, what's the aim of the SPP? They actually say directly that they want to harmonize 300 areas of legislation and regulation. That includes integrating military and police between Canada, US, and Mexico, ensuring that there's bulk transfer of water from Canada to the US, coordinating no-fly lists, integrating refugee policies, expanding the temporary foreign worker programs, harmonizing health and environmental regulations to the lowest standards, and privatizing Mexico's nationalized oil sector, but most importantly, they want a 5-fold increase for the tar sands production in Alberta. I'm going to talk now a bit about TILMA, and what the Trade, Investment and Labor Mobility Agreement does is it helps the SPP reach its goals, but on this very localized level in BC and Alberta. So TILMA was signed in 2006 by the premiers of BC and Alberta, and it was put in place on April 1st, 2007, and it's going to be fully in place. It's kind of in this transitionary period right now on April 1st, 2009. And TILMA is a top-down agreement, so it covers all of the government entities including municipalities, school boards, ministries, but it also covers all the decisions that they make. So, say for example, a municipality puts in place a bylaw, it covers that. It also covers any type of new government program. Now, the language in TILMA is, I'll start off by saying it's really broad, but here's rule number 1 of TILMA. There's no obstacles to investment. The second rule is governments have to recognize or reconcile existing standards between the provinces of BC and Alberta. And the third thing is that these government entities, they can't establish any new standards or regulations that restrict trade, investment, or labor mobility. So how do we enforce these rules under TILMA? Like NAFTA, it sets up this private court system, a private dispute settlement process, and the panelists to this dispute process have already been appointed, and in BC they've been appointed by the BC Liberals, so they're handpicked. And these panelists can make rulings and dish out up to $5 million of taxpayer money anytime, for example, no obstacles to investment is say a policy is brought forward by a government or municipality. So TILMA is able to push the tar sands one step further, and at the same time it really entrenches the rights of investors over any type of democratic process. Any law, for example, that could be put in place to assist temporary foreign workers or to, improve their working conditions, that could be seen as a TILMA violation. Any regulation that, say, Alberta actually wanted to put and caps on some kind of emissions for industry, those could be seen as TILMA violations. If the city of Burnaby wanted to in some way put a limit on the Chevron expansion, that might be a TILMA violation. So TILMA, it's called a trade agreement, but as I've said and listed off, it's actually a list of what governments can and can't do, and it really allows investors to just sue governments, sorry. So to conclude, TILMA really calls into question the rights of communities, provinces, and municipalities to stop the tar sands, while at the same time eroding safety and environmental standards. The SPP allows for large-scale discussions about creating the infrastructure like pipelines and the movement of people. So the SPP and TILMA both lead to further occupation of Indigenous territories and the exploitation of workers, as well as environmental destruction. The good news is that there's growing resistance to both of these agreements as well as the tar sands. And I hope that you'll join us in this fight. Thanks.
Bringing it now back to the British Columbia and Burnaby level, as was outlined, this massive and unsustainable tar sands expansion is not intended for provision of resources to Canadians. It's almost all of it is intended for export out of Canada, primarily to the U.S. But there's a number of BC connections as well. Not only the pipelines that MacDonald was referring to that are shipping the unrefined bitumen directly, plan to ship the unrefined bitumen directly to New Orleans or Chicago or these other places in the United States through British Columbia. One of the major pipeline expansion proposals that's moving ahead alarmingly rapidly is a proposal from Enbridge, the so-called Gateway Pipeline. So the intention is to build a new what they're calling a new superport in Kitimat in central British Columbia, central northern BC. Kitimat, the home of the Alcan smelter, and the intention is to build a new $4 billion pipeline from the tar sands through central British Columbia, notionally along the Highway 16 corridor to Kitimat, where the bitumen would be loaded onto oil tankers and would be shipped to Asia, to China, or to California for refining in Asia or refining in the United States. And so the context about that is that we currently have a moratorium on oil tanker traffic along the fragile coastal ecosystems of British Columbia. So in order for this vision to go forward, we would have to permit oil tankers to ply up and down the coast of BC and near the and in the coast of BC. And so we can immediately think about the Exxon Valdez oil spill that MacDonald referred to, and what a disaster that was for coastal ecosystems not too far north up in Alaska. Just the other day, there was a very serious oil spill in the Mississippi River near New Orleans that's also causing quite a bit of damage. Where there are oil tankers, there are spills. Just a few weeks ago, an additional pipeline proposal was announced for that same general corridor to take tar sands bitumen to Kitimat, and that was announced by Kinder Morgan. So Kinder Morgan already, as we'll discuss, has pipeline infrastructure in BC that comes right down here to Burnaby. Kinder Morgan is proposing and starting to advance proposals for a second mega pipeline to Kitimat to also bring tar sands oil. I guess I just wanted to say that these pipelines are absolutely essential to the overall SPP vision for a five-fold expansion of the tar sands. It's no good for them to make this massive expansion of tar sands production if they can't export the product out and away. They're already underway with one expansion of the Trans Mountain pipeline, and they've recently been announcing proposals for a third expansion of the Trans Mountain pipeline, TMX3, and indeed these are proposed to bring tar sands bitumen here to Burnaby, and then to ship further south from here. I just would conclude by saying that obviously this is right in our backyard, but it's also a vital issue for all Canadians and a vital issue for us as Canadians, because our country is now making a very major, significantly negative impact in terms of climate change with the tar sands expansion. Tar sands, for a barrel of tar sands oil produces 3 times and perhaps 5 times as much greenhouse gases as a regular barrel of oil. The tar sands expansion is Canada's fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions. If Canada intends to do anything meaningful in the fight against climate change, it has to put a halt or slow down this incredible proposal for a five-fold expansion of the tar sands from where they're at today. As Canadians, we have an obligation to not let that happen in terms of what we're doing to the warming of the entire globe. As neighbors of the First Nations people in northern Alberta and in northern BC, we have an obligation to work together with them to prevent the negative impacts that are happening to them now and that are proposed to happen with this expansion. And we have a vital stake in terms of protecting the ecosystems all along the coast from oil tanker traffic, and we have an interest in protecting our own health locally here from refining of some of the dirtiest oil in the world, and which generates significant local pollution, and of course from that kind of bitumen passing through here and on to export to the United States.